What are the biggest mistakes that business owners are making when they're starting their own podcasts? We're breaking it down right here, right now. It's On Air Brands.
You are now tuned in to the On Air Brands podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the On Air Brand Show. I am Todd Giannattasio, along with my guest co-host, Mr. Erik Cabral.
What is up, Todd G in the house? What's going on, brother?
What's going on? We got a great topic today, and you are the expert to be talking about this because any small business owner, mid-sized business owner, entrepreneur, personal brand that wants to start their own podcast, On Air Brands is the place to go, and you are the man running the show there. So I'm excited to have you on. I know you have cut down the long list so that we could at least prioritize into a practical conversation here today for our listeners and viewers. But thank you for coming on and sharing your expertise on this topic.
Yeah, bro. I love this topic. It's probably second to building a brand and personal branding, but it is all part of the ecosystem, part of the personal branding flywheel, so to speak. So yeah, I'm ready, man. Let's do it.
All right, man. Well, let's start it off. Hit us. What do you see? We got our audiences. Our audience is like, man, Gary Vaynerchuk's been telling me for 15 years I got to be, publishing content. Erik's doing it. The brands they're putting out there, their podcast shows look great. All right, I'm in. We're getting towards the end of the year. People are setting, all right, what's my New Year's resolution going to be? I'm ready to jump into launching a podcast for my mid-sized business. What are those initial mistakes, roadblocks that you see people hitting when they start going down this path?
Yeah, well, the initial mistake is a silly one, but an obvious one is continuing to kick the can down the road. Right. I'll do it next week, or I'll do it when I have the right answers, or when I figure out what platform, how do I get it up there? Libsyn, Blueberry, Anchor. What do I use? Like, getting caught up in the details is the first mistake that the majority of the people, right? They come to me and they ask those questions, and I say it to them, and I say it to our investors as well, who, I'm on the board of a group that has over 1,000 real estate investors. And oftentimes when we have meetups, they're always asking the simplest questions, like, I don't know what color to use for my business card, or I don't know where I'm going to get the money. That's actually the easiest part. But anyway, I digress. Podcasters, and I consider you a podcaster. If you're already thinking about it, you're already knowing and considering this for your business, which I highly recommend everyone do, right? You mentioned that Gary always talks about, Gary has become his own broadcast network.
That's right.
If we haven't realized it. And he recommends we do the same. So every single business has to consider themselves, whether you're selling sheetrock or you're selling shoes, you have to understand and know that you are a media company first, because marketing is critical. It's the lifeblood. It's the fuel in your rocket. And without it, you don't really have a business. Am I right, Todd?
That's right. Yeah. No customers, no business, and no marketing, no customers. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And in today's world, unless you're selling some kind of $5 trinkets, right? Like where it's purely transactional, business is about relationships and the ability to reach people at scale and build relationships at scale. There's no better way to do it than podcasting, being inside someone's AirPods or Beat headphones or whatever it is that they're listening to out there, right? Like that's how your business can turn into a brand that has real relationships with people. And the longer you wait, the more unlikely it is that you'll start. So, start something sooner than later.
So some brass tacks, and I did make a list of the top 10 things that came to mind when it comes to business owners hesitating. So once they get past the hesitation point and they do get started, one of the number one things that people make mistakes when they start a podcast is winging it. Now, I only appreciate that if it just gets you started. Like, start. If anything, just start.
Yep.
But once you start and you have an intention of this complementing your business or one of your business verticals, and you have a very specific idea around what the podcast will serve within your business and the community, don't wing it. Like if you got a real product, you have something that really adds value in people's lives, uh, come up with a plan.
Yeah.
Come up with something that will be effective once you execute on the podcast. What is it going to do to serve not just your business, but your clients?
Yeah, for sure. And for everybody listening, if you go to onairbrands.com/show, check out episode number 26, and that will help you come up with just a simple plan that you could get done. The episode is like 35 minutes long. So in 40 minutes, including listening to that 35 minutes, you will have a very simple, intentional plan to tie your business and podcast together so that, you're not just winging it.
Yeah. Don't wing it. If you have a real business.
Yeah.
If you're starting out, you're a solopreneur, you want to use this as part of like you're figuring it out and documenting your journey, then yes, definitely. That's I was sort of in the middle when I started, like documenting the journey and building a personal brand was a major goal of mine for the podcast, which we're coming up on our 200th episode. So, but yeah, if you have a business and you have a very specific plan in your mind, don't wing it. Come up with a plan before you start, but don't let it hold you back.
Yeah, and even if you are doing it to document and to build in public and all that kind of stuff, like you should still be doing it somewhat intentionally. John Henry, are you familiar with him? He's the founder of a new insure tech startup, whatever, called Loop. But he's got a great story. He went from like doorman to founder and built up a great startup a couple years ago. He's part of the whole kind of Gary V tribe of influencers. But he's been talking a lot lately about building in public. And so like what you just said, like even if you're just documenting your journey as a business owner, I forget the numbers. He was talking about it on Instagram the other day, but he was able to raise millions of dollars for his new startup in days, in like 5 days or something like that. And it was because he was building the product in public. So when he was having his initial meetings, it wasn't like, oh, nice to meet you. Tell us about your background and tell us about your idea and tell us about blah, blah, blah. Like all those surface level initial things that like, then you need to have like 7 meetings. But because he was doing it he was building in public, documenting it, publishing it on, putting videos out on Instagram, etc. Like the investors that he ended up meeting with had already been able to, within, 20 to 30 minutes of consuming his content, they totally knew the direction they were going, the vision for the company, the culture they were building, the way they were going to disrupt the industry. And he was able to raise a ton of money very quickly because he was building in public, documenting his journey through content publishing.
Yeah, it's powerful. One of the things that the podcast can best serve for you is building credibility. So if you have a business or you're starting one and you want to use this podcast as a platform for people to see what you're doing, to understand what you're about, your core values, it's a wonderful tool to continue putting it out there, and hold you accountable, because the cadence of a podcast is not just once a month. Right. Maybe I'll just do it every other week or something. No, you can't phone it in. You literally have to consistently put out episodes and content on a regular basis, meaning at the very least one a week. Yeah. Some of our clients do 2-3 a week. So I would highly recommend you go in with that idea and the commitment that I'm going to be consistent and I'm going to put out episodes once a week for 6 months to a year, and then see what the results came from being that committed.
Yeah. So exactly. And that ties right into what Lisa said here in the chat, in the live chat on Facebook, is that, if you're good at what you do and you're consistent and trustworthy, then word of mouth is going to be an awesome compliment. And like you said, if you're consistent, putting out that content, showing up frequently, that builds the credibility and trust. Plus, that helps increase your word of mouth, because it's a lot easier for someone to share a podcast episode than it is for them to go out and try to refer you for your products or services when no one's asking them for them. Right. Yeah. And Hones chimed in here too. Good business plans get built after the business is started, right? So if you have to start winging it just to get used to it, I love the idea that action creates clarity. So if it gets you started faster, start winging it be directionally accurate. That's what I like to think of it as. And then you can create your plan around what you've discovered are your strengths. And once you start publishing, you'll build an audience and you'll have a feedback loop that you can now, kind of tailor your content and your business and your products and your offers all around what your audience actually wants and needs, which just increases the likelihood of your success.
Yeah, absolutely. And please keep bringing the comments and the questions and share your ideas and your thoughts here. We appreciate that big time. Thanks, Lisa. And thanks, Hone, for sharing. So one of the second or the top at least 3 things, and by no means am I discouraging anyone from doing this. I am discouraging people who think that this is a fly by night or this is something that won't produce results for you, because it will. We have hundreds of case studies and people that can attest to this. Talk to anyone who has a successful podcast. You have to do it. You have to get started, but don't let these top sort of barriers. We're sharing this so that you don't become a statistic.
Exactly. We're sharing these mistakes so that you can avoid them, not as a discouragement. Yeah.
Exactly. So the second thing to me that I noticed that people do, and they probably can improve on this, is they start a podcast with a so-so brand associated with it. And when I say brand, I'm not talking about the logo. I'm talking about, how does this connect to you and your core values and beliefs? How is this heavily ingrained in what you believe in and what you're passionate about, right? So if you start a business, I highly recommend you identify your core values and your business. If anyone out there, especially W-2s, my W-2 people out there, I was in it for over 20 years. I get it. It becomes wallpaper, literally.
Yeah.
White noise in the background. It's a poster in the conference room and nobody pays attention. No one knows. You know why? Because the corporation doesn't push it. They're not passionate about it. The managers, the leadership, they don't care about the core values because they're about themselves. Hence why I left corporate America. But as small to mid-sized business owners, we eat, breathe, and live our core values. So if you can come up with your core values and have that resonate through your brand, that will push out your culture, your mission, everything that you love, adore, and appreciate in life through the podcast. That will resonate. That's when people are going to start showing up and loving on what you do and paying attention and supporting. So develop a brand, which will eventually build a culture and a community if you're doing it right. So
that's right. And Hone chimed in with the opposite of what you're saying, but all relevant. He says a feedback loop for people might need is that their idea actually sucks and that they hate the business, but by getting into action, you find out faster and then you can pivot or make a decision, as opposed to one, like you said, kicking the can down the road for, 6, 12, 18 months, whatever it is. But yeah, the faster you get you get out there and you have a feedback loop of action, then you can start making decisions, right? Like the speed, the action creates clarity. It gets you data. That data might be dollars in the bank. It might be positive feedback. It might be traction and growth, or it might be, no, I'm not feeling this and nobody's interested. But instead of having wasted how much money and time building out some crazy website for 6 months and buying a radio campaign and TV campaign and billboard, how many tens of thousands of dollars did it used to cost to get that feedback loop to find out no one wanted it? But now you can find that out very quickly by creating content, having conversations, putting it out in front of an audience and seeing what the feedback is. So regardless, it's taking action and getting that feedback loop going.
And that's a good thing. Like you said,
right.
Trial by fire,
or
figuring it out as you go. That's okay. So if you're going to use the podcast as a tool for experimentation, by all means do it. But understand and know that this could potentially take off. And now you're committed to something. Right. You're like, oh man, I didn't know that this was going to be so big. And now you're committed to a podcast that's talking about sex. And you're like, oh crap, I don't want that to be part of my brand. So there's all different sort of scenarios, but I highly recommend you going with the intention of, I'm going to develop a brand that's worth paying attention to. It's going to build a culture and a community that I can pour into. I'm talking from experience because it happened and is happening. And I just want to make sure that if you're out there and you're creating a podcast, that is inevitably and eventually going to happen if you're doing it right. So number 3. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and here's the great thing about a podcast and building the culture and community is that even if, like, let's say, if you're a service-based business or you're coming up with new products or offers, if as long as you're committed to building this brand and building the community, the feedback loop will help you with developing how you serve the community.
Mm.
It doesn't mean you have to change your community, or maybe it does early on if you're trying to figure out who you want to build your community around. But once you have that community, it's not wasted effort. It's building that community and then crafting and serving. So using that feedback loop. So, when you have that culture and community, like you're talking about, building that around your show, building the brand around your show, it's not that you're going to pivot out and say like, oh, we're talking about this today and we're talking about that tomorrow. It's that you're always serving that same audience and you're always building this same similar culture. You're sticking to those core values that you talked about there, Erik, and then crafting and pivoting within that.
Yeah, I love the feedback loop.
Yeah.
That's powerful. So the second or third thing is the lack of consistency. So we've had clients that they committed a year. They did what we asked. We said, you got to at least commit mentally and psychologically to 12 months of your time to record content, which, if you're doing it right and you're chunking it out, you could dedicate, like I do, a day to recording a podcast, which produces weeks, if not months of content in one day. You have to be consistent with it, right? You have to understand and know that as any good entrepreneur, any good business owner, if you don't have systems and processes in place for anything you do, it's gonna fall to the wayside. You're gonna forget about it. It's not gonna happen. So as long as you stay and remain consistent, it's going to benefit you. Because if even with social media, and I know it's a challenge because there's a lot of negativity here, especially within this space that we're in here in Facebook, you can kind of use it as a tool to focus specifically on what you need to accomplish and then get out. You don't need to engage in all the negative or the politics or this or that, but you can go in specifically with the intention to say, I'm going to provide value for anyone who wants to hear it, like we're doing right now. And here it is through a podcast format, which I don't like calling it a podcast because there's video involved.
Right.
So we know that when we say podcast, just from here on, just global sort of comment here is that podcasting is content. Podcasting is creating content for you that if you're doing it right, again, you're sharing and you're giving and offering solutions to people that need it. So the people that are listening to you most likely are looking for answers to something. So that's number 3. Be consistent with that content. So when they're not on their phones all the time, but if they are, you want to catch them. You want to catch them and you want to consistently put it out there, and your podcast can do that for you.
And when you do it consistently, whether or not they're on their phone, they are going to come and check for what you're doing, right? They come to, it becomes part of their routine where every Wednesday at noon, it's the On Air Brand Show, and they know to check in on that and check it out,
So true. So true. So here's one that I don't talk about a lot. But there are podcasters out there and DIYers mostly that, I appreciate those entrepreneurs out there that figure it out. They're like, okay, I need to know and build this thing on my own so that I can speak it. I can speak the language and I know how to then build something around it. You can't share ideas and offer advice on something you've never done before. So I get it. The people that start their own podcasts. So a lot of them that do start their own podcasts and physically do the editing and all of it on their own, the back end, they don't have a handful of episodes that they bank. They'll record 2 or 3 and then they'll launch the podcast. Well, I highly recommend if you're doing a podcast on your own and you're doing soup to nuts, record at least 6 to 12 episodes that you can bank and put into your pipeline so that, heaven forbid, something happens, you need to take a break. You've got scheduled out for weeks, if not months in advance, so that you don't have to stress yourself out. And this is what helps you with the one before this, which was consistency. It helps you to be consistent.
Yeah. And what I love about that too is that, and this is different. There's different types of podcasts for everybody, right? Some podcasts are news based or timely based, and that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about creating valuable typically evergreen content for businesses. And when you batch create and plan ahead, it gets you out of that mindset of like trying to be timely or talking about specific news that happened, quote unquote, today, because now you're creating content that this is going to be published in 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks. So like it has to be something that holds value over time, and it breaks anyone out of that like mental prison of like, oh, this was the news this week, let me talk about that, because it's not going to be relevant by the time something that's batch created is going to be published. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. This is another challenge that people have, but entrepreneurs that are building, mid-sized, large businesses understand you have to block your time. So I mentioned it earlier that if you want some consistency, you want to set yourself up for success, is blocking, half a day or a day, whatever it is you want to do, or that you have the time for, blocking time specifically for podcasting. So for us, this is our time. Todd, Amber, or I show up to this time, and we always know it's on our calendar and it's blocked. Now, we also have other shows, and I have to block specific days for those shows. So every other Thursday, I record for Capital Hacking, and that day records 3 to 4 episodes in one day. Now, that's how we ensure the consistency, and we hold ourselves accountable to showing up by creating and blocking time for ourselves on our calendar.
Yeah, and I think having it on a consistent, like it's every other Thursday. It's not like, all right, Josh, what's our schedule like next month? When are you available? Let's figure it out and get it in, right? Like there's no mental effort whatsoever. It's just straight up every other Thursday we're showing up at this time, and that's when we're recording. I think there's a lot to say for that too, in keeping yourself consistent.
Yeah. Another one, and this goes a little bit deep, because you need to have a business for this one to be relevant to you, or a business that has clarity on what you're delivering. So if you create a podcast and you already have a business and you understand, okay, this is going to benefit my business, I'm not 100% sure how. There are business owners out there that start a podcast and they don't have a specific idea as to what vertical, what business category, what product or service they're selling that can directly tie into the podcast. So I highly recommend that if you're a business owner, a successful business owner, that you tie the podcast in with a message, right? A call to action that sells or shares what that product can do for your audience. So highly recommend putting pen to paper, figuring out, okay, once I create this podcast, this is a business, and that business is going to serve another part of my business.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think, it's the old Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind, right? Like make sure everything is relevant and tied together, so that, again, back to what you said, it's not winging it and you're just showing up random. Like, it's not like, oh crap, it's Thursday at 2:00 and we're recording, what are we talking about? But rather, you have an intention. And even though transparency, that is kind of what we do, but we're always talking about the same topics and serving the same audience. So we know, because it's what we're doing every day, we can pull out very quickly, like, okay, this is who we're talking to today, and this is what we're going to cover, right? So we're able to plan our episodes very quickly because we stay in our lane of expertise and we know who we're coming to talk to.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, if your podcast is based solely around what your company does for a living and what it can do for people, yeah, you should be able to get on any stage. This is a stage. Keep that in mind. You should be able to get on any stage or any podcast and speak about your expertise. You are the subject matter expert in your world, and you need to own it. And then you step to the plate and freaking swing and just knock it out and provide value to everybody listening, so that they know that you exist. And then they know, we all hear this a million times. Todd and I always say, know, like, and trust you, so that they can do business with you. And that's what marketing is about. People need to know you exist in order for them to do business with you. So not last, but this ties into what I was saying before with, not tying your podcast into directly to one of your businesses or your, categories or your product, is you go into the podcast, and this is really almost everybody that we talk to, Todd. They don't have a call to action. What is the call to action for the podcast? And if they do, it's fragmented. They're like, oh, this week or next week we're having an event, or this is the thing. Like, it's constantly changing, and it's not evergreen. Like you said, it's specifically talking about an event that's happening in a month. This is not radio, folks. When radio went out into the airways, it was gone, unless you were, back in my day, had a cassette and you're recording that actually that actual, broadcast. But with podcasting, not like radio, please don't ever connect those two. They're very different. Is that you are putting out an episode that is going to be evergreen, meaning it's going to have legs and it's going to have life beyond that actual broadcast. So keep in mind, your call to action should be consistent. Number one, it's always the same message every single podcast, either whether it's follow, like, subscribe, or for us, our podcast is always like, hey, if you need podcast solutions, if you need a production behind your podcast, you need support, you need a team. That is what we do. And that is our messaging. For example, also for capital hacking, our message is always, invest with us, look into our deals and look into us, understand and know that we are a trusted, valuable source for you in terms of investing. Come to the family, come to one of our events. So that's constant and consistent. So make sure you find out what your call to action is and just keep plugging away at it. What we do is we record ads, our own ads on our shows. And that, if Todd and I forget what the call to action is, it's baked into the podcast.
Yeah, I love how you guys do that on Capital Hacking and the other shows. And I love that it's also you guys speaking it. Like I hear, I'm about to go off on a tangent because this really pissed me off this last week. So I like podcasts where the promotion is obviously relevant to the audience that's listening. And two, I think personally that it should be read by the host, because otherwise if there's like if there's a sound drop, like an audio drop, and it changes into someone else's voice, I'm just like, boom, that triggers my brain. Skip. Wow. Hit the skip button, right? Yeah. Tom Bilyeu, Impact Theory. I'm calling him out by name because he'll never hear this. And if he does, then that's freaking awesome.
We're calling out to you, Tom.
He has a great show. I love the content that he puts out. I've been listening to him for years now. And he's always had sponsors, where he starts off the episode and he says, hey, this week's episode's from blah, 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 whatever. Mm-hmm. And they're always usually relevant. It's like, here's a thing for Audible and, subscribe to Audible. I love learning, or, whatever, things to help you learn or eat more healthy and all those kind of things. Like a week or two ago, I thought there was a mistake on my phone because I start listening to his show and all of a sudden, like a Dr. Phil, which I have never watched, but it sounds like it's like Maury Povich basically now. It was a commercial for like, on the next episode of Dr. Phil, like, who's the baby daddy? You'll never guess. And then the jammering back and forth of a couple arguing. And it was like, Wednesday at 11 on ABC or whatever channel. And I was like, wait, what's up? I'm like, did I accidentally tap like a different app or something like that? And it's been on the last few episodes. And I'm assuming it's because whatever kind of dynamic advertising they're testing out is some kind of generic network that's putting that stuff out. And, to tie it back into mistakes and no calls to action, make sure that your calls to action and whatever you're promoting is relevant to your audience and true to your brand, right? Like you talked about the core values, consistency, having a solid brand. Like, make sure that everything through your show is that way. If you're going to take on sponsors, make sure that they're relevant to the show. Most of our clients are not going to, most of our audience is not going to be taking on sponsors like that, but they're going to be promoting their own stuff. Like how on, Capital Hacking, when we're talking about on this show, if you want to start your own podcast, go to onairbrands.com, right? That's our call to action. So keep it relevant. I think that, the host is the one who usually should be the one reading it so that it's authentic, but staying on brand with whatever it is that you're promoting so that it's relevant and doesn't throw the audience off into a tangent. Yeah, is very important.
It's good. Host read ads, absolutely, are convert more. That's a fact. Mm-hmm. What I've recently discovered with some clients and what we're going to be testing. So anyone who's made it this far into the episode, you're going to get the pearl and the prize here is that host read ads, absolutely, but organic host read ads are the most effective and convert the highest. And that meaning, like Todd and I reading an ad right now, but it doesn't sound like an ad. We're actually talking about a product and we just baked it into the conversation. Organic host read ads. It takes a certain type of host to be able to cleverly, that word, to bake it into the conversation. Those are really effective. Or if you wanted to record an ad that is host read, don't do it with music. We do it with music. Right. We test. We go back and forth. I love the music, but there are some shows that are more effective with the host read ad with no music, so that the cadence, like Todd said, there's no break,
Right.
there's no disruption in my mind when I'm listening to a show. It sounds like the show,
Right.
even though it's a host read ad. So
Right.
yeah,
I have
good
to
advice.
say a great example. This is not safe for work usually, but is Kevin Clancy from Barstool.
Mhm.
His Instagram videos, which are sponsored, which is super cool and a whole nother level of like having sponsored Instagram videos, right? But obviously part of the Barstool network is huge. He curses on his little videos, so not safe for work. But they're usually like 60 seconds, 45 seconds, 3 minutes is like usually the longest. But the way that he naturally segues into anything from like, there's a mortgage company that sponsors the show, there's clothes. So like, he'll always like, if he's like, he'll talk, he riffs on like a pop culture thing that's happening, right? And he'll be riffing on it and be like, man, blah, blah, blah. That was like, I can't believe ever being like uncomfortable like that, especially because I wear this type of sweatshirt.
Yeah.
My on-air brand sweatshirt keeps me
So
comfortable
good.
all the time. Like the way
Yeah.
he says it is like he is a pro.
Yeah. There's a guy on YouTube. I forget exactly who, Ryan Airy or something like, I forget his name. I think, anyway, I don't want to give free plugs, but it's a YouTube channel, and he does that really well. He's having a conversation, with us, the audience, and he segues the conversation. The content ties. It's
Yeah.
so good. Ties
Yeah.
the content that he's delivering to us. It's pop culture. And then it goes right into whatever Dollar Shave Club or whatever
Right,
it is.
yeah.
And he's like,
Yeah.
oh man, I forgot to shave today. And then boom, it goes right
Yeah.
into it.
Yeah. It's
so
awesome.
good.
I love a good segue.
So
I don't
good.
know. I'm just being in the business. I'm like such a geek for like anything where I see like a good segue. I'm like, oh man, that was great.
Yeah. Oh, good one, man. Woo, bonus points. I know we're winding down and we're getting to the end of our show here. So if we don't get to all 10, absolutely reach out to us. Go to onourbrands.com/show or onourbrands.com to see what we're all about as well, or share here in the comments if you need to hear more. We could always send you more.
Yeah, we'll bring,
because
if there's enough fanfare, we'll bring Erik back, for part 2 to finish the list here.
yeah, there's I could literally make 25, the top 25 mistakes that business owners make. But one of the other ones that's challenging is and people don't talk about this, and people don't think about it. If you're a podcaster, you should be a guest on other podcasts. So if you're a podcaster in this day and age, you're most likely a business owner and entrepreneur. So why wouldn't you be on other shows to promote what you do? So not only what you do through conversation and stories, that's what I recommend. If you do guest and you're a regular guest on shows, share your story. That's what sells. Now, when you get the opportunity to plug something at the end, most likely that's usually the cadence of every show. How can people find you? How can people reach out to you?
Right.
Please share your podcast. Why? Because the people who are listening are already into podcasts. They have the earbuds, they have the headphones on, and they have their phone in their hand, most likely. And if you're saying the best way to get to me or the best way to know more is to listen to my show, Entrepreneur Circle, like how we did that. So that's what you do, because most likely you're increasing the chance of these guys subscribing to you because they're already into podcasts. That's your audience.
Yeah, I love that. Yep, podcast listeners listen to podcasts. It's not rocket science figuring that out. And so if you want to get more people, that's definitely the right way to do it. And what's the likelihood? Of course, there's definitely a more likelihood if someone just spent 20 to 45 minutes listening to you tell your story and have those conversations that they'll take an action. But much more likely when they're already a podcast listener, they're listening to a podcast, the app is open on their phone, and the call to action is slide over, and then they move over, and now you build an even deeper relationship with them through your show. And now the calls to action on your show are relevant, tied back, reverse engineered with the end in mind to your business's call to actions for your lead magnets or your products or services or whatever it is that your show is relevant to.
So good. So good. Yeah. And the last thing I want to share, and as I mentioned, there's way more, and we could talk all day about this stuff, Todd. But the biggest mistake that I think people make is not having, and I alluded to this earlier, not having systems, not having processes, not having something to set you up for success so that it's automated. Because if it's depending on you and the pockets of time that you have available on a spontaneous level, That's not going to work. That you're going to pod fade. That's what we say in the industry. You
Mhm.
can't get past 6 to 8 episodes. So ensure that has motivated people when I tell them about pod fade. Like, do not become a statistic,
Yeah.
and set up systems and processes and teams in
Mhm.
order to create a cadence and a flow and a consistency for you and your show. So that's another big mistake that people don't that they make. And if you're doing it, if you're DIYer and you're an solopreneur and you're figuring this stuff out, create systems for yourself so that you can now share those documents with the team when you do have one. So always understand and know, as business owners, we do everything in the beginning. We're a switchblade, absolutely, but you want to be able to speak to it and then have the documented process that you've already established. And then you're like, here's the playbook, go execute.
Yeah, for sure. I think a big thing that people not misunderstand, because they are two different words, but I think need to start being combined for entrepreneurs is automate and or delegate. It needs to be automated for you, the entrepreneur, where you record the episode and now the rest is automated. That might mean that a human is doing manual tasks, but for you, it's automatic. You show up on the mic with your game plan. You have your intention around who you're speaking to, the products and services that you're promoting, and then you show up, record your content, and then you can be hands off because you have that process. And whether it's a person or some kind of software or a combination, it all gets done. And if you're looking for a team that already has that process and system, it is On Air Brands. It is Erik Cabral here, and you have seen his expertise, just a little sliver of it today. So if you are planning to start a podcast for your business, please hit up Erik and go to onairbrands.com. Do not become a statistic. And with that, Erik, thank you so much for your time. Everybody, make sure that you are subscribed to our show. We show up live every Wednesday, and then it comes into your podcast feeds so we can be in your eyeballs and your earballs. But please, if you want to be doing the same thing, go check out onairbrands.com and talk to Erik, and we will catch you guys on the next episode.
You are now tuned in to the On Air Brands podcast.